I'm not a lawyer. I'm in IT, and it's all smoke and mirrors. I may refer to these, but they're there as my little safety net. Now, I'm not a lawyer. And for many years, I actually feared lawyers. And I think with good reason. You see, I'm transgender, as you probably gathered. And I think I better just explain a few things. I am a woman. My gender identity is female. But when I was born, the doctors took one look at me and said, boy. And boy, that created a few problems. It was right from my early age in the playground. I knew something was wrong. I knew that I belonged with that group of children over there, but everybody told me I belonged over there with the boys. And there was this disconnect. And in some ways it was quite tangible in that I didn't get to do all the nice things, I got to do all the horrible things. But it went much deeper than that. I knew beyond doubt that I was a girl. And nobody could shake me of that conviction. And shake me they did. Bullying, beating, any sign of femininity, get knocked down. And it gets to you. I got to feel broken inside, ashamed of myself. And it took a while to kind of get to grips with why I was like this. But I started to see on television, documentaries in the press, people just like me. And they're referred to as transsexual. Now, these days, we prefer, some of us prefer transgender. I think my preference would be just trans. That word sexual, it's very loaded. And we don't like that. This is not about sexual practice, sexual proclivities, or sexual orientation. So just trans. So I kind of got a feeling of sort of my place in the universe. And I started to get a plan together. I knew I was going to have to transition. I knew I was going to need money. Because things were very different back then. We're talking sort of late 70s, early 80s. The treatments just weren't available on the NHS. I was going to need money. So I knew I needed to get a good job, a good education. And so, my plans were forming. So when I got a bit of independence, I started pursuing those plans, those dreams. And by my early 20s, I'd transitioned. And that is the greatest achievement of my life. Yes, 14th in the world, windsurfing, blah, blah, blah. Transition is the greatest thing I've ever done. But it wasn't without its cost. I was sacked from my job for transitioning. The MOD considered me a security risk. Within an hour of telling them, I was marched out of the building. I never saw my place of work again. It didn't go well with my family. My family completely rejected me. And I lost a lot of friends. Kept a couple. Most of them didn't want to know me. Now, that was back in 1985, and it was a very different time back then. We had no legal protections. We didn't have the Gender Recognition Act, didn't have the Equalities Act. I was still legally male. The advice to us was to just disappear, to start afresh, move. If people didn't know you were trans, they couldn't beat you up about it, literally. So in 1988, I joined IBM. I've worked there ever since, and that was my fresh start. They didn't know I was trans. I was just any other regular female employee. I had no idea, really, the company I was joining, but I had a good idea that they were a bit sort of forward-thinking, might be a good bet. And I was proved right, because we're now the #1 employer worldwide for LGBT inclusion. That's both from Stonewall, the Workplace Equality Index, and more recently, Workplace Pride, #1 in the world. So I chose well. That's the plug for IBM. Yeah. I'm just going to have a quick look at the notes, and I'm very dry. My boyfriend's a performer. He uses these vocal zones. I think I should have had one, but anyway. So just that simple statement of your gender, it causes us trouble the world over. In many countries, being transgender is actually illegal. And just having a gender presentation that doesn't match some legal document can drop you in serious trouble. There are laws such as impersonating a member of the opposite sex. And that, if you think about that, that's just a subjective view, and it can land you in prison. And in countries where being transgender isn't specifically covered, we get targeted under anti-gay laws because we're visibly gay. And as I've explained, this is nothing to do with sexual orientation. In a country where I'm legally male, I'd be considered gay. I have a boyfriend, he's straight. In that country, he'd be considered gay. How crazy is that? Think about that one. The world over, the state owns our gender. Imagine stating to somebody that you're male, female, and being told you're wrong. Does that sound crazy? Because that's reality for trans people. We don't get to choose our gender, somebody else does. In the UK, we sit in front of panels of experts. We get assessed, it's a long process. Eventually, we might get all the letters together that enable us to change documents. It's a horrible process to go through. Argentina is the world leader in that respect. It is far simpler over there. The UK are lagging behind somewhat, even though we might be actually leaders within Europe, I think. Some of them, well, let's not state that too definitely. Now, in my early days after transition, I had rather an easy time with officialdom, this idea of sort of lawyers and the law, because I was still legally male. I had a healthcare agreement, and it warned me that giving the wrong information, false information, might invalidate a claim. Well, I'd stated I was female. That's the truth. But would that be regarded as false information? I was insured as a woman in my car insurance. Would that be regarded as fraud if I found out that I was transgender? If I was in a car accident, would I wake up in a men's ward in a hospital? If I got in trouble with the law, maybe on a charge of deception, how would I be dealt with in the courts? Would they introduce me as Mr. So-and-so? And God forbid I ever ended up in prison, would that be in a men's prison? Now, I had good reason to fear all of these things because there were stories in the press all the time about these things happening, and it just scared the hell out of me. Even today, earlier this year, a British woman travelling to Canada was detained by Canadian Border Control and put in a men's prison. She is legally female in this country. There was a visa irregularity. It seemed a minor thing, but the moment they found out she was transgender, the whole thing just snowballed. And it was a human rights lawyer who got her out. I mentioned the press. They have a terrible relationship with trans people. They objectify us, they misname us, misgender us. And they always seem to push this deception angle. We are not deceivers. In reporting of murders, which are sadly all too common, 50% of all LGBT hate crime murders are trans people, 50%. And yet we're only 1% of the LGBT spectrum. That's a horrible, horrible statistic. And often our genders are completely erased in the reporting of our lives, either because the press believes they're honouring some legal name or legal gender, or they believe they're following the wishes of the family. Now remember, I said my family completely rejected me. Families often, in the death of their child, will revert to using their old name, their birth gender, and our lives are completely erased. Recently, I had cause to think about this at my father's funeral. You might think that's a fairly sad occasion. It wasn't. It was quite uplifting. Half my family I hadn't seen in 30 years. Some of them I have my allies within the family, but the close family just rejected me. I hadn't seen them for 30 years. And it was a chance to sort of stand up and be proud of who I was and show that I hadn't been beaten. But my brother was there. He doesn't honour my gender, doesn't recognise my gender identity. And I wondered, in the case of my death, if it was me in that coffin, what would the name on the service sheet be? Would he try to erase my identity? Can he even legally do that? I have a birth certificate in my correct name and my correct gender. We are the forgotten people. Anti-gay laws are often anti-trans laws, but this is rarely reported on and rarely acted against. Even in countries that have LGBT equality legislation, it rarely includes trans people and often specifically excludes trans people. There are clauses in the UK, laws in the Equalities Act, in the Marriage Act, to deal with trans people and exclude us from certain things. That needs changing. I noticed coming in that bottom line, I don't know if you all can see this, defends the most vulnerable. Trans people are the most vulnerable people in society, and when dealing with the law, we are at our most vulnerable. And I'm here to ask for your help. Recognise that trans people are not deceivers. Recognise that we're some of the most disadvantaged in society, in employment, in our ability to earn. Not all of us can afford all the expensive therapies needed to align with society's very narrow views of how men and women should appear. So often there will be elements of a person's physicality that seem at odds with some legal gender on a document. But honour their asserted gender, their pronouns, their name. It's so insulting when people's gender is not respected. The practice of law, I think, is the search for truth. When a trans person presents their gender identity to the world, they are presenting their ultimate truth. And I'm here to ask you, please help us uphold that truth. Thank you.